In the east of Argentina lies a vast arid zone, extremely hot in the summer and very cold in winter. At the foot of the gigantic Andes mountain range, Aconcagua extends the largest oasis of the Americas built by human hands, an oasis that has also become the largest vineyard in Argentina. It was in the middle of the 19th century that the government put the French agricultural engineer Aimé Puget in charge of developing agriculture in the province of Mendoza. He supervised the planting of vines, olive, and fruit trees, and brought many European winemakers here. Today, in what should be a desert, enormous vineyards stretch as far as the eye can see. Mendoza produces 95% of Argentina's grapes. But small and large producers are now threatened by water scarcity. Here, in order to exist, all the vines count on irrigation. The water in the region depends on a single source, the Mendoza River, that descends from the Andes mountain range. The precious water guardians, the tomeros, are responsible for distributing it to each plantation. Rodrigo is the tomero of La Lunta in the suburb of Mendoza. He's the only person authorized to open the floodgates to irrigate each property. This irrigation system is an old and complex network of canals called acequias, a word of Arabic origin meaning water carrier. In Mendoza, water is a shared right. Each vineyard has the right to a certain volume of water and a specific irrigation time. Rodrigo controls the water supply for 4,200 acres of farmland, for over 400 properties. This morning, Rodrigo visits Angel Mendoza, one of the oldest wine producers of the region. Hidden by his olive trees, his vineyards are an evocation of the land of his ancestors, who came from Galicia in Spain.
The good fortune of this region is that during the 19th century, the government had the brilliant idea of bringing European winemakers here to develop the land. Thanks to that, we now have a know-how inherited from immigrants from Spain, Italy, and France. It's a crystal, a melting pot of Mediterranean civilization that all these cultures brought us. The olive trees and vines, it's as if we're in the Mediterranean region.
Angel receives the tomero because today it is his water tower, as they say in Mendoza.
I was expecting you, in order to open the irrigation canals. The level rose slightly. We'll see how we can distribute it for tonight.
Let's see if we can give you a little more water. Here's the schedule. You have the right to 10 hours here and 10 hours over there. Yes, 10 on the other side.
20 hours per week.
20 hours weekly. We'll irrigate this plot.
And we'll try to water the other two plots too. Argentina's viticulture settled in very dry areas where annual rainfall doesn't reach 200 millimeters. The vines need 600 millimeters. This means that the only way to grow grapes in these areas is through a rational watering method. It's been 100 years since this resource is distributed by canals. 100 years of rationalization. 100 years, the water from melting snow is distributed between all the properties. It's almost 150,000 hectares of farmland, because this water serves not only for agriculture, but also for industry and consumption. So everything you see green in Mendoza reflects the magic of a man who brought a trickle of water to the foot of each plant. That's one reason our vineyards are all leveled, so that all the vines receive a balanced amount of water. We've created nearly 4,000 kilometers of ditches from those left by the native Indians, the Huarpes. Through the ages, they turned all of this into an oasis. They were the first to understand how to channel water from the mountains.
Long before the arrival of Europeans, the indigenous people, the Huarpe, began mastering the irrigation and farming of this inhospitable area. All of Mendoza's modern irrigation system is an age-old legacy of that sedentary civilization, decimated by the diseases brought here by the conquistadors. The last Huarpe Indians disappeared from the region in the 18th century. This site, called barrancas, meaning ravines, is located near the Rio Mendoza, where traces of this pre-Columbian civilization can be found. Diego Estrellas is an archaeologist, and he searches for rare vestiges of those first inhabitants.
It's a preform. They'd begun to carve a projectile point and only went halfway. You can observe the size. It's maybe 1,500 to 2,000 years old.
In ravines carved by the river, sometimes Diego discovers objects, but this site, spreading over 12 miles, is constantly washed away by erosion.
These ravines are often destroyed by floods, and it reveals sectional profiles. It reveals new elements whose origin is human. There too, you can see the strata with traces of coal. It's proof of human activity probably dating from 2,000 years ago. These agroceramic groups were already using water power, water from the river. Several types of plant cultures appeared in this period. We found traces of quinoa, amaranth, and corn as well. These resources necessitated water transfers and canals carrying the water to the crops. When the Spanish arrived, they optimized all that and smoothed out the land. Large flat areas appeared with very low slopes, superimposed on each other, so they'd all get irrigated without washing away the earth. It was a way to change the landscape and build a cultural landscape.
Today, Mendoza's entire landscape is undergoing a metamorphosis. The vines spread as far as the eye can see, to the foot of the Andes. In 10 years, the planted areas were multiplied by 3. It's the new wine El Dorado, and it's attracting the world's multinationals. They're mainly producing Malbec, a wine exported mainly to the United States, Canada, and the UK. All these vineyards require more and more quantities of water at a time when this resource is threatened by global warming. Water is now becoming a source of conflict that challenges the traditional distribution system. Alfredo and Ramiro, two winemakers from the new generation, visit the Uco Valley, where prestigious vineyards of Mendoza are found. They've come to oversee the beginning of the harvest. They've had to rethink their entire irrigation system.
Ahora empezamos con la cosecha acá del cuartel, que estamos haciendo un raleo.
Tiene que estar, ¿ah?
¿Qué haces bien?
¿Cómo andamos bien?
¿Cómo anda esa cosecha?
Pero ahí estamos, arrancando.
Está la alerta hídrica, digamos, una alarma, un
We're in a
sentido de
water
alarma,
alert.
alarma para la gente.
It's a sort of alarm that warns us that it hasn't snowed and there's not enough water.
Entonces, que tienen que hacer un cuidado
We must be very
intensivo
careful not to waste Mendoza's water.
desde el recurso hídrico acá en Mendoza. Se está haciendo un abuso también del uso de agua.
We use
subterránea.
groundwater
Las
abusively.
freáticas están bajando mucho.
Water tables are declining dramatically,
Profundo para
forcing us to go deeper to find water.
cuestión de
That's a political issue. The government must regulate the new plantations more strongly.
nuevas plantaciones.
Aquí no tenemos permiso de pozo, sino por
We're not allowed to drill here.
24
We
horas
must wait for our water day.
cada 15
We have a
días.
water day every
Cuando no es
15
nuestro
days that
turno,
lasts 24
solamente
hours.
dejamos que el agua corra
When it's not our
y
turn, we let the
para
water
los
run and flow to
vecinos.
neighboring properties.
Y si no, lo juntamos
Otherwise,
en un reservorio
it collects in a
grande
large
y
reservoir,
con unas bombas
and we distribute
vamos
it
a
through the
todo el
drip
sistema
system
de
with
riego
pumps.
por goteo, que es este.
You
Todas
see all
las-
these
todas las
pipes?
mangueras y
They drip
gotea
precisely at the foot of the plant.
exactamente debajo de la
It's the
planta.
most effective
Es
way,
un poco una
and we
forma
water
más
only
eficaz
when needed.
de riego y uno puede regar de acuerdo a la necesidad.
La ineficiencia de este sistema de
Today,
riego
the
de
aqueous
irrigación,
system is
si bien
ineffective,
no
even if it's
aprovecha la
picturesque.
cantidad de agua necesaria, digamos.
It yields only 40% efficiency.
El 60%
We're
del
wasting
agua se
60% of the water,
Lo que
so
hacen
we
es
need to
hacer que
optimize
usar
watering at all
sí o sí.
costs.
Sí, que no hace mucho calor, ¿eh? Sí, está viendo ahí, ¿eh? Sí.
Whether groundwater or the river, the main water source is unique: the Andes melting snow and glaciers. This vital system for the region is now under surveillance. Ricardo Villalba leads the Mendoza Center for Environmental Science, Glaciology, and Snow Science.
La cordillera de los Andes, que es una masa
The Andes
impresionante,
Mountains, which is an impressive mass with its extremely high mountains, 16,000 to 23,000 feet, is capable of intercepting all the air masses arriving from the Pacific and loaded with moisture. This is when snow is deposited. That snow falls in winter, it will remain in the Andes, and when spring and summer arrives, it starts to melt to form the water of our rivers, which are the main water resources for the region. It's the engine of the regional economy. It's what gives life, and this has allowed the existence for over 400 years of our oasis system in western Argentina.
De sistemas de oasis en el oeste argentino. En un desierto, la
In a
variabilidad
desert,
climática
climate
es enorme,
variability
la
is
precipitación
enormous.
es enorme.
On a
Los
scale,
glaciares
rainfall
cumplen
can
un
vary
papel
from
regulador
100 to
de
5.
reductor de la vulnerabilidad
Glaciers
regional.
play a regulatory role. They reduce the vulnerability of the area. These glaciers are of enormous importance as strategic reserves for all of West Argentina. This image shows the retreat of glaciers in the Andes. We see clearly how this ice mass stretching more than 2 kilometers disappeared during the 20th century. If we had no more glaciers, the year when the snowmelt is only 5% compared to normal, we'd have only 5% of the needed water, and our vulnerability would increase immensely.
The strategic water reserve that irrigates the entire area is the Potrerillos Reservoir. The lake collects the water from the Andes melting snow. Hervé Canal, a French climatologist, studies the consequences of climate change on vineyards all around the world. Before starting his inspection tour in the vineyards of Mendoza, he visited the reservoir, an ideal place for observation and assessing this year's water reserve.
I think Mendoza is among the regions where climate change has already had an important impact. On the one hand, there's been a general problem for several decades, and that's the sharp decline in snowfall over the Andes, which produces a relatively low water supply. That's the first concern. The other problem is the temperatures, especially the peak summer temperatures that have gone up, creating problems for viticulture. Hot summers create a rapid maturation for the grapes, and for the wine as well.
For large modern companies in the Uco Valley, the mountain waters are no longer enough. They must also pump up water from the aquifers.
We're now in a situation that's not critical yet, but which raises several questions. If we look at the vineyards that use drilling systems which collect water from the aquifers, we're now at a water level that was expected for 20 years from now. So it's an intense decrease. So we're in a situation where we should ask questions.
To assess in detail the impact of climate change on the vines, Hervé Canal places sensors at different locations of a vineyard in order to record temperatures over several years.
Observations made from sensors that were installed in 2007 that we already have are extremely interesting. They show differences up to 2 degrees in a plot between a microbasin area 2 to 3 meters lower compared to an area a little higher in the plot. We had no idea we'd see these differences, especially on a very flat relief. The fact of showing for a vineyard the scale of temperature differences that were predicted for 2050 already allows the winemaker to have an awareness and see how he can adapt to the current climate. We can encourage more diversification of varieties and not stay within the main grape, Malbec. It's starting to get complicated for the Malbec.
Malbec, the king of Mendoza's grape varieties, isn't doing well with climate change. The hottest weather makes it ripen too rapidly. They'll probably need to find a replacement for this emblem of all Argentina's vineyards. A profound cultural change for which some new generation winemakers are already planning for. In the past, the region experienced significant changes that led to the disappearance of some large estates. Ramiro was one of the few winemakers to give importance to all of this abandoned cultural heritage.
At the start of the 19th century, many immigrants created big companies here, very large cellars, that have now disappeared.
Esta es una bodega monstruosa realmente.
This is a monstrous bodega, really. These estates had their own generators, their offices, their own boilers, cask-making shops, where they made and repaired their own bordelais, the giant casks that were used at the time. In fact, they made everything here from A to Z. It was an industry, a factory, a very large factory. All this work that's been lost makes me sad. So much effort, so many sacrifices for this family. These people who came to Argentina in search of a new beginning, and now nothing's left. In Europe, old things are appreciated. The older an estate is, the more value it has, right? But here, the past is worthless.
Ramiro's family started their winemaking by acquiring a small traditional winery in Mendoza, neglected for decades. His mother initiated the family adventure like a pioneer. Between the 2 and the 3, I prefer 2.
2 is a 2015.
Started from scratch with the sole desire of making another organic wine with a small vineyard, Ramiro and his mother are reinventing a winemaker's fate. Starting from zero, in front of a white sheet of paper, allowed us to be creative. While learning, I try to collect information, but without prejudice, free from pre-established principles. I think my goal was to get the best grapes and the best wine possible.
If you don't do what you love, it makes no sense. When I come to the winemaking cellar, I don't come to work. It's not the same. I'm grateful. Thanks to God, I left law school to study enology. And the other part of the family, the lawyers, they thank me now because they can drink the wine, thanks to me.
This year, the vagaries of the weather delayed the harvest by several weeks. The harvest is awaited. It is always a moment of uncertainty. The day of the harvest festival, as if to protect themselves from bad luck, Ramiro goes to the Church of the Virgin of Carodilla, protector of wineries and vineyards throughout the region.
I feel she's very close. I ask her things. I try to keep my promises. I feel she protects the vineyards enormously. When you work the land and do things with faith, you see the result. Sacrifice and faith are very important. If you give good things to the earth gives back. For me, she's also the protector of the land, much like the Pachamama.
Pachamama, the Mother Earth of the Incas, is still celebrated throughout the Andean world. If the harvest festival is under the sign of Virgo of Carodilla, it is rooted in the oldest pagan rituals. This festival of Mendoza is one of the most important on the American continent and attracts hundreds of thousands of people annually.
The Harvest Festival represents an entire year's work. Every sacrifice for the maintenance and care of the vineyard, to see the plants grow, fighting against the elements and against other factors, human or not. It's all embodied in the harvest. So this festival is very important for us. It's the end of a cycle, after a long year. When we're lucky to gather and then have the grapes in our cellar, it's very important for us to celebrate this.
The Mendoza Harvest Festival is the largest wine festival in the world. Each neighborhood, each district has its parade and presents a beauty queen. Parades, processions, giant tastings take place over 2 weeks. The highlight of the festival is the election of the queen. It's the occasion of a gigantic show with 800 players, and it attracts more than 100,000 spectators. In Mendoza, the vine is the motor of the economy. It has made Argentina the first South American wine producer. But the system of shared water resources is no longer sufficient, given the rise in production and climate change. The valley's winemakers will have to adapt if they want to continue to benefit from the snow and great glaciers of the Andes and preserve the unique oasis that they have inherited.